The '84 Olympics was the most astonishing experience. It's the only Olympics I went. Mass participation road races have been perhaps a little unfairly punished by the conditions of COVID. The pro-cam team have done incredibly well to pull this race together, to get the elite athletes in from all over the world.
Welcome to another episode of Finisher Talk. Today I get to speak to another great finisher, Tim Hutchings, internationally acclaimed commentator. He started his career as an international long-distance runner, finishing fourth in the 1984 Olympic Games and second in the IAAF World Cross Country Championships in 1984 and 1989. He's also the founder of the Brighton Marathon, which is the number 2 marathon in the UK. He's in Delhi on November 29th for the Airtel Delhi Half Marathon and will be talking to us about his career, elite level training, the Airtel Delhi Half Marathon and marathons in the new normal.
It's an absolute pleasure for us to have you here with us and to talk to us about the ADHM. Thank you so much for being here. Could you give us a very brief introduction to yourself? What's been your running career like, and how has been your commentating career in the last few decades?
Yes, I mean, I owe everything to running, really, the sport of athletics. I've been incredibly lucky, Sandy. I mean, I had a very normal, I would call it middle-class upbringing here in the UK. Middle-class family, but my mum worked at a private school, so I got educated there with my brother. Lots of rugby and cricket and sort of general fitness from the age of 9 through to 18 at school, where I would win all the cross-country races and the athletics races, just through my rugby fitness, really. At the age of 19, I ran a 3:57 mile, a sub 4-minute mile. I'd come into contact with a very good coach up in London and had been training quite hard for a couple of years, and went to the Commonwealth Games back in 1978, the distant mists of time. And then went to Loughborough University, which is the big sports university here in the UK in the Midlands. Sebastian Coe went there, and many, many famous athletes. And funnily enough, my running for the 3 years there more or less stagnated. I didn't really improve much. But in 1982, came out of university and had a very good year, made the Commonwealth Games again. And really from 81, 82 through to 1990, I was a fully fledged international athlete. Lucky enough to have no more than my fair share of injuries, and went to the Olympic Games and World Championships, European Championships, I think 4 Commonwealth Games, and met my then wife and have 2 wonderful kids through the sport. So yes, I have a huge debt to the sport of athletics. And then in 1990, 91, had an injury, a couple of operations. They didn't work. Had to find something else, some other way of earning a living. And sort of, again, through good fortune, got into TV commentating, which I've now been doing for fully 30 years. I love it. Travel the world, meet loads and loads of friends around the world, where at these races I go to annually. And yeah, here I am now, trying to survive lockdown like everybody else, the horrible tortures of COVID-19, which so many millions of us have put up with. But looking forward enormously to coming to Delhi next week, next Monday.
I discovered that you placed 4th in the 1984 Olympics, and that's the year that PT Usha came 4th in the 1984 Olympics as well. Do you have any recollection of that happening? What's your view on that? Were you at all aware of India running in the Olympics at that time and placing so well?
Probably not, to be perfectly honest. I mean, funnily enough, my mum was born in Burma, and they are an Indian, Eurasian family. So I'm about 10% Indian. But no, I had never been to India back in the 80s, never traveled to India during my competitive career. The '84 Olympics was the most astonishing experience. It's the only Olympics I went to. I got overlooked, of course, I would say very unfairly, for the 1988 Olympics. I had a slight injury mid-season, missed out selection. But so '84 was my only Olympics. It was a wonderful games in Los Angeles because it was the first big commercial games. The stadium was fantastic, held sort of 85,000, I think, the Coliseum in Los Angeles. And finishing 4th, while you could argue that's, people say it's the loneliest position to fall and the most heartbreaking position. At the time, I was just delighted to be selected for the games, and then to travel to Los Angeles and compete, and then to get through my heat, get through my semi-final, make the final. So if I'd finished 8th or 9th, now 35 years later, I'd be looking at it going, that was a great achievement. Finishing 4th at the time didn't really impact upon me. And it's still something I regard with huge positivity, and I'm not bitter about it. It's one of those things. I'm very, very lucky. Many of my colleagues back in the 80s had shortened careers through injury or illness, and I was able to get probably 85% out of myself. So my whole feelings about 84 in the Olympics are very positive, but I only became aware of athletics in India because to most of the world, I think India largely still means cricket when you say sport. But, you know, obviously ProCam have done an incredible job in changing that perception. But no, only in these last 15, 17 years have I become aware of athletics in India. And that is really when it's grown from being very small to being absolutely huge.
What do you think are the challenges of conducting an event like the ADHM in this current scenario? I mean, as the Airtel Delhi Half Marathon happening in Delhi right now is something of a bellwether, right? So how do you see it, and what's your view on what's being done and how it's happening?
Well, the challenges are absolutely massive. I do think the sport, mass participation sport, and indeed mass participation road races have been perhaps a little unfairly punished by the conditions of COVID that have been imposed on everybody, because I think running outside in the fresh air has been proven to be an incredibly remotely tiny chance of COVID being transmitted from person to person. However, you know, these rules are in place, and here in the UK, the USA, the whole world, mass participation races are under these tight restrictions. I know that ProCam looked very hard at holding a race where there could be a mass participation element to some degree, where you control the flow of people through the start line, maybe 5 people starting every 5 seconds. Obviously, that enables you to get actually in half an hour, hundreds and hundreds of people across the line, thousands within an hour, and so on. And that format has been used in 1 or 2 places, but it was deemed not possible, and they have just gone for the elite race. So incredibly frustrating. I've got my own race here in the UK. You know, it's quite a big marathon here in Brighton on the south coast, and we bent over backwards desperately in recent weeks to stage our races, and we haven't been able to. It's all been knocked on the head because of government impositions, and those, right or wrong, are what we have to adhere to. So, you know, the ProCam team have done incredibly well to pull this race together, to get the elite athletes in from all over the world, particularly from East Africa, of course. I'm sure everything will go well. They have been able to look so intensely, in such detail, at the format, the template that is being imposed, and I'm sure it'll all go very smoothly.
What does it take for these runners to actually travel here and come and participate? I'm sure they have their own fears as well. They have their own constraints. What does it take to bring an elite field like this? You know, it's going to be 60 elite runners coming into Delhi, participating in this race. Surely they have, you know, travel constraints, they have stay constraints, whatever, and they may also have other constraints, such as, you know, not being able to run, right? I mean, for the last 7-8 months, there have been no races happening, so that may also impact them.
Well, these top athletes are used to traveling all over the world for big races. So getting from their home villages in Kenya and Ethiopia to the major airport in Nairobi or Addis Ababa, whichever, and then flying off to the USA, to Europe, to India, to the Middle East is a very familiar trail that they don't struggle with that part of it. I think when you then layer on top of that all the conditions of COVID is when it starts becoming complicated. The paperwork, the tests before going to the airport, at the airport, on departure, on entry into the country. That is something that everybody else is having to learn. And of course, I think the athletes, one good thing is that full-time athletes train in the morning and they train in the afternoon. They train twice a day. I defy any athlete to say they run for more than about 3 hours a day. They've got to get to their training places. But essentially, training these top athletes shouldn't take more than about 5 hours a day. Now, that might leave you tired, but it also leaves you plenty of time to get your head around machinations of the administration of getting everything right to travel. So most of them have obviously been able to cope with that. They've all got managers, they've got agencies that look after them who will have helped them through that journey. So getting the athlete from their home village where they've been doing all their training, or their home city, onto the ground in Delhi is a challenge, but certainly not insurmountable. For the athletes themselves individually, it has been a very hard year. Of course, there haven't been many races at all. I think since early March, when there were a couple of big races in Japan, things are pretty much shut down. So athletes haven't been able to earn the money they wanted. Many of them, therefore, haven't been able to get the races in that tick several boxes in their shoe contracts, whether with Nike, Adidas, ASICS, whatever, all these big shoe companies. So they're desperate to race. There's also the psychological and physical frustration of being ready to run and training hard and having no outlet. But funnily enough, in several recent races, like the London Marathon a month or so back, like the World Half Marathon Championships in Poland a month or so back, the athletes have been producing incredible times, very fast times. So it's quite an interesting experiment for coaches, because I think many of them are probably finding out that actually if you just cocoon yourself and hide away for 6 months or more, training hard, staying focused, and then come out and race, you can produce something very special indeed. So there's two sides to it. You know, there's good and bad. But yeah, the athletes that are arriving in Delhi next week will have gone through all these hoops to get there and will be desperate to race. There's so much frustration, pent-up frustration.
So how long has it been since international racing has started, and where is it right now? Is it close to normal, not yet close to normal, still beginning?
Nowhere near normal. There's been very, very few races in recent months. I mean, I went to the US Olympic Trials Marathon in Atlanta back on February the 29th, and things virtually shut down after that. There was just about nothing in March. A couple of races. The Tokyo Marathon, I think, was March the 1st. There was a race in Nagoya, Japan on March the 8th, and then it shut down. And, you know, lots of the big races that were due to take place in April, the spring marathon season for the Northern Hemisphere just didn't happen. So you're talking about Boston, Paris, London Marathon, and then, of course, Berlin Marathon at the tail end of the Northern Hemisphere summer, the Berlin Marathon in September, Chicago Marathon, New York Marathon, all postponed, all cancelled or postponed. So no, the racing is absolutely not back to normal yet. There's very little going on. Even races that were scheduled to be in April, this coming April, so nearly 6 months away, have decided not to give a date and to move to next autumn. So London Marathon is not happening next April. It's on October the 4th, I think it is, next year, sometime in October next year. My marathon in Brighton, we're not holding it in April, we're holding it in September. People are just not confident enough about even events 4, 5, 6 months hence. These vaccine announcements over the last few days, thank God, are very good news, and maybe will change people's perception. But I think most big race organisers will play it safe and stick to the dates they've announced.
The ADHM is it's an almost significant global event.
Yes, I mean it's a great message, because you have to work so hard to convince the local government that you can put on an event at the moment. You know, I know the London Marathon works incredibly hard to stage their elite-only race a few weeks back in the centre of London, and I know that the Procam team will have done the same for the Airtel Delhi Half Marathon. You know, as I said, they wanted to hold a mass race of sorts, found that wasn't going to be possible, and have now managed to get this elite race over the line with 60 or 80 elite athletes in attendance. Many of the usual organising team are going to be in attendance. As I say, I'm hoping to fly out there next week if my visa comes through. But yeah, the stipulations of adhering to COVID rules in the hotel, when they go training, just moving around from A to B to C in those few days in Delhi will be very, very strict, and will be, you know, I'm sure the Procam team will make sure the athletes stick to them. It's a wonderful achievement to have got this event signed off, and, you know, huge thanks obviously are due to the government departments responsible, and I'm sure we'll see a fabulous race. And in a way, it puts even more focus on the elite athletes, because there is no mass race. Normally we cover the elite races, and then we cover for some hours the mass races and all the fun and the jamboree and the fabulous energy of the masses and the costumes and so on. But that's not possible this year. So huge responsibility on the elite athletes. I'm sure they'll deliver, but the racing will be fast and furious. That is one thing. No quarter will be given. There won't be any more friendliness than usual because of COVID. They will be racing viciously.
This year's field is one of the best fields that we've had, right? In the field.
Yeah, I think 12 men have run under 60 minutes for the hour, and that is the supremely high benchmark for the elite half marathon runners, breaking the hour for the half marathon. And for the ladies, I think 9 women have broken 70 minutes, which is a slightly lower bar, but 66, 67 minutes is incredibly fast. And those are routine times in Delhi. You know, that the roads of Delhi are flat, they're good quality where the athletes are taken, and the race is incredibly well organized. Hugh Jones, the race director, does a wonderful job in working out the course for the elite athletes. So they come back year after year, knowing that they can run incredibly fast times in good conditions for huge prize money, and that the race is going to be televised globally. So it ticks all the boxes of a major international race, but it's going to get a lot more prominence this year because next week, in 10 or 12 days' time, as I speak, simply because there are so few races taking place at the moment. The vast majority of race organisers have not been able to convince local authorities to allow them to stage a race. So it's wonderful news for Delhi.
What does it take to do a sub 60 half marathon?
Well, the first thing you have to get your head around is that all these international athletes train twice a day. They will go out for a run very early in the morning, 6, 7 in the morning, and put in their main training session. That might be a long run, it might be intervals, it might be a hill session, a series of hill repetitions, and then they will train again in the afternoon or evening. That's usually more of a steady recovery run, something that almost massages the legs, washes out all the waste products, the lactic acid from their legs in preparation for the next day. They will be getting massages 2 or 3 times a week. They live a fairly monastic lifestyle, you know, lots of sleep, lots of laying around. You don't want to be busy if you're just recovering between training sessions. And that's, I suppose, an advantage a lot of the East Africans have is because they are more locked away, if you like, in their training camps and in quiet village settings than in the Western world, where it's very easy to be busy, too busy in between training sessions. And I think many Western athletes have only clocked onto this in the last 10 or 15 years, where they now will train in camps, especially in North America and to a lesser extent in Europe.
Now that you're not running competitively, do you at all train, or do you just run for fun?
Oh, no, I run for fun. I mean, I haven't raced competitively for many, many years. I think to an extent, when you've raced to a very high level, you know, the Olympic Games and so on, I don't want to say everything else after that when you've retired is an anticlimax, but it's almost like the fight has been knocked out of you. When I retired at 30, 31 and accepted the fact that my injuries were making me retire and I'd finished and I started a family and, you know, you earn a living from other means, I pretty much had the fight knocked out of me, if you know what I mean. There was nothing left to achieve. I knew I wasn't going to run any more personal bests. I was never going to run another sub 4-minute mile. And so I just accepted the balance of life more. So now and this was pretty much the case back then, run 4 or 5 times a week for half an hour, maybe 40 minutes occasionally. I don't do any long runs anymore. I had a slight heart issue 4 or 5 years ago myself. I think as a result of all those hard years of training. I was just unlucky though, that's not the norm. And I love my running now because I absolutely feel no pressure to run hard, to put in hard efforts, to feel discomfort. I go out and I jog across the fields in the countryside here in the south of England. And if I feel like walking, I stop and walk. If I want to stop and chat to a cow, I'll stop and chat to a cow, or stop and take photographs with my phone. I get back and I might have been out 40 minutes and I might have covered 3 or 4 miles. It doesn't matter. And I love that freedom from pressure, if you like.
As amateur runners, what would your advice be to us?
If you take up running slightly later in life, whether it's in your mid-20s, mid-30s, mid-40s, you know you've got personal bests ahead of you. You can improve very substantially. You know, my last personal best was when I was 30. It was like 31 years ago or something. So I know I'm never going to get any better. I'm on the downhill slope. But actually, if you're relatively new to running, and/or you only run 3 or 4 times a week. I say only run, that's still plenty, but you can make huge inroads to your fitness, your personal bests with small incremental adjustments. You know, if you're running 3 or 4 times a week, try running 4 or 5 times a week or 5 or 6 times a week. You will see huge improvements just because of that volume of training and the physiological effects it's having. If you start putting in 1 or 2 training sessions as opposed to a steady run, the bread and butter for a distance runner should be running once a week, let's say 5 or 6 times, 2 or 3 minutes. Slightly harder for 2 or 3 minutes, then you take a couple of minutes jogging and then go again. Do 5 or 6 of those, and that is threshold work, which will increase your aerobic threshold and push your ability up enormously. So I'm quite envious of people who take up running in their 40s and start enjoying it. It doesn't have to dominate your lifestyle. That's the lovely thing. If you're running 4 or 5, 6 times a week, once a day, that shouldn't dominate your lifestyle. It's not a profession, but you will make an awful lot of friends. It can be a very positively social thing, and you will get rewarded. What you put in is what you get out, so to speak. It's a very direct question to that. So little and often would be one of my first words of advice. Don't make huge incremental jumps in volume or intensity. That's when you get injured or you get ill or you lose enthusiasm. So always very, very gradual increases in what you put your body through. And enjoy it. I think the important thing about running, but at sub-elite level, is that it's something that should enhance your life, whether you're a student or a working adult or a retiree. It should be something very positive in your life. Running should, I think, primarily be a social experience at sub-elite level. So find somebody to run with, and the miles just drift by as you chat to each other, and it makes the hard work easier and more enjoyable.
What's your view on the latest trend of virtual events?
I mean, they're a wonderful substitute for not being able to run in a race with your friends and gather in thousands. I'm a bit of a skeptic because, you know, many of us go for a run most days and have our various routes, and running one of those routes and somebody saying, well, you're now in a virtual race, doesn't really change the experience for me that much. I don't think that virtual races will remain a trend once things start returning to normal. I think you look at the energy and the passion and the color and the noise and the smells and the experience and the friends you mix with at these major gatherings like Airtel Delhi Half Marathon, any of the other massive races in India, the Mumbai Marathon and so on. I don't think you can ever substitute that with a run through the countryside on your own, just through some kind of a Zen state you've got yourself into and pretending you're running alongside thousands of other people. You won't have been lining up alongside world champions and Olympic champions like you can in these big races. You won't be sharing the experience with all the runners around you, with the tens of thousands of spectators along the course. You won't have somebody there to finish and put a medal around you amongst the throng and the buzz of a finish area. There's just 1,000 different experiences associated with running these big races in person that I think a virtual race will never be able to replace. So, of course, virtual races have to be the order of the day for the moment. But the sooner things can return to normal and we can all enjoy these massive jamborees, the better.
What's your message to all of the thousands of people who are participating in ADHM?
I would say keep the faith and carry on enjoying your running. You know, since I stopped being a professional runner for 30 years now, I have days when I don't feel like running. And the hardest step is that one step out to your front door. Sometimes I prevaricate and I put off going for a run. I'll change and I'll rub my legs with oil and massage and then think, oh, I need a coffee. And I'll put it off again and again. And then when I get out running, I'm 20 yards up the street and I'm thinking, oh, this is lovely. Why did I delay it? What was I putting it off? What was I scared of? So get that first step out the door every time. Almost don't think about it. Don't overthink it. Keep the running going. If you can, increase your volume very, very slightly, a tiny bit. You know, add an extra run each couple of months. An extra weekly run, I should say. But if you're training 3 or 4 times a week, try and up it by one day, another half-hour run. And actually, of course, when you look at the volumes, that is another 20% added to your week's volume. So it's not insubstantial. but enjoy your running. That's probably the most important thing. Do little and often, and things will come back to normal, you know, and the big race organizers, ProCam and their massive races all over India will be waiting.
We look forward to seeing you in Delhi next week, and hope you have a great visit, and let's all hope for a great race.
Absolutely. Thank you very much, Sandy. Yes, look forward to seeing as many of you as possible when I do get to Delhi. Thank you, Sandy.
Thank you.